The global shipping industry did not realize it was under threat the day Tesla quietly updated a single line of code, because no ports shut down, no unions protested, no CEOs went on television to panic, and no dramatic announcement came from a stage with flashing lights. Yet beneath the noise of quarterly earnings calls and geopolitical distractions, something far more dangerous than a strike or a fuel shortage had begun to take shape, because the Tesla Robotaxi Cybercab was never meant to be just a car and never meant to be just a ride-hailing tool. And what made it lethal to shipping was not speed or design or even autonomy alone, but the way it collapsed assumptions that had held global logistics together for more than a century. Assumptions about drivers, depots, shifts, insurance, downtime, routing margins, and power itself. Single line of code. Because no ports shut down, no unions protested, no CEOs went on television to panic, and no dramatic announcement came from a stage with flashing lights. Yet beneath the noise of quarterly earnings calls and geopolitical distractions, something far more dangerous than a strike or a fuel shortage had begun to take shape, because the Tesla Robotaxi Cybercab was never meant to be just a car and never meant to be just a ride-hailing tool. And what made it lethal to shipping was not speed or design or even autonomy alone, but the way it collapsed assumptions that had held global logistics together for more than a century. Assumptions about drivers, depots, shifts, insurance, downtime, routing, margins, and power itself. And this is why Elon Musk did not need to say much when analysts finally noticed what was happening, because the numbers were already speaking louder than any keynote ever could, showing that a machine designed to move people had quietly evolved into a node in a distributed transport network that did not sleep, did not strike, did not demand overtime, did not negotiate contracts, and did not care about borders in the way humans do. And while traditional shipping giants were still thinking in terms of fleets, warehouses, and centralized control, Tesla was thinking in terms of swarms, autonomy, density, and software-defined movement, which is why the Cybercab was designed without a steering wheel or pedals, not as a gimmick but as a declaration that human presence was no longer a requirement for mobility at scale. And once that mental shift occurs, the implications for shipping become impossible to ignore, because the most expensive part of short and mid-range logistics has never been fuel or vehicles, but labor compliance, inefficiency, and idle time. And Tesla's system attacked all four simultaneously, not by lobbying governments or undercutting wages, but by removing the human bottleneck entirely, creating a vehicle that could operate nearly 24 hours a day, dynamically reroute based on real-time demand, charge itself during low-cost energy windows, and integrate directly with supply chain software without the friction of human scheduling. And what made this especially destabilizing was that Tesla did not enter the shipping industry the way startups usually do, begging for contracts or pilot programs, but instead allowed the shipping industry to come to it indirectly through urban logistics. Because once robotaxi networks reached critical density in cities, the same vehicles that moved commuters in the morning could move parcels by midday and high-value freight by night, all without changing hardware, only priorities and software. And this is where the power takeover narrative stops sounding like hype and starts sounding like arithmetic. Because if a single Cybercab can replace multiple human-driven delivery routes while costing less per mile, depreciating more slowly due to optimized driving, and generating revenue across multiple use cases in a single day, then the traditional shipping model begins to look not just inefficient but structurally obsolete, and incumbents who rely on thin margins suddenly find themselves competing against a system that treats margin as a software variable rather than a constraint. And this is why executives at legacy shipping firms reportedly began asking questions not about Tesla's vehicles but about Tesla's data, because whoever controls routing intelligence, demand forecasting, and autonomous fleet coordination controls the flow of goods, and control of flow has always been the real source of power in shipping, more than ships themselves. And Tesla already possessed something no logistics company ever built from scratch: a global real-time sensor network in the form of millions of connected vehicles feeding back road conditions, traffic patterns, charging behavior, energy prices, and human movement trends, allowing the Cybercab to operate not as an isolated unit but as part of a continuously learning organism. And once you understand that, you understand why Musk's apparent silence was not confusion but confidence, because the disruption was no longer theoretical, it was operational, measurable, and already compounding. And the shipping industry, accustomed to negotiating leverage through scale and infrastructure, found itself facing a competitor whose scale was not measured in warehouses or ports but in lines of code deployed overnight. And what truly unsettled analysts was not the Cybercab itself but the way Tesla framed ownership, because instead of selling vehicles outright into fleets, Tesla positioned the Cybercab as a revenue-generating asset that could be owned, leased, or networked, turning transport into something closer to cloud computing than trucking, where capacity could be spun up or down instantly based on demand signals. And for shipping clients this meant something radical: the ability to move goods without committing to long-term fleet investments, labor contracts, or fixed routes, effectively converting logistics from a capital expense into an on-demand service. And once that shift occurs, the balance of power tilts sharply away from traditional carriers, because flexibility beats size when margins are thin and demand is volatile. and this was especially evident in last-mile and regional shipping. Historically, the most complex and expensive segment, where cybercabs operating autonomously could undercut costs while improving delivery times simply by never wasting motion, never parking unnecessarily, and never waiting for a driver's shift to begin. And critics initially dismissed the idea that a passenger-focused autonomous vehicle could handle serious freight, but that criticism missed the point entirely. Because Tesla did not need to replace container ships or long-haul freight overnight, it only needed to absorb enough